Hi, and welcome to Victory's YouTube channel. I hope you enjoyed today's message and that it speaks to your heart and enriches you. You should like and subscribe below so that you never miss a message. And now, on to the message. May God bless your day.
One of my favorite stories to tell about Christmas in our family, and some of you may have heard this before, so forgive me, because there are some of you who have not heard it before, and I think it's really good. We used to, at some point in time, I'm not sure how your families handle the Santa situation. So if you're watching online right now, earmuff your kids, right now. So how do we handle it in our house is that we played into it with our kids for a period of time, to the point where I think Noah was probably about 5, maybe 4 or 5 years old. And we just moved into our house, and he and I were at Ralph's. I remember Ralph's over in Sunbow, and we were going around Christmas, going shopping, and I think you were in the hospital maybe with Isaiah, and so we were just doing some shopping, and then a lady comes up to us and says, "Hey, little boy, what do you want for Christmas? What do you want Santa to bring you for Christmas?" And now, so many years later, it makes perfect sense. He said, "A sandwich." I'm like, "What? All right, a sandwich. That's what you want for Christmas." He goes, "Yeah, a sandwich." I said, "Okay." The lady looked at him like, "Okay." And then she walked away, and I said, "Well, hey," light bulb went off. I was like, "So what kind of sandwich do you want for Christmas?" "Grilled cheese." "Oh, okay. What kind? Do you want ham in it or no ham?" "Ham." "Okay, all right." And so Christmas Eve and Christmas morning, because we were at home, and life was easy back then because we didn't get up at the break of dawn and rip open things. We just have never done that. And so we were begging to go to the tree, so he would just park it in front of the TV, and then life is fine. And so while he's sitting there watching TV, I'm in the kitchen, right directly behind him, making a grilled cheese sandwich with ham, wrapping it in tin foil, and then wrapping it in paper, and then putting it right under the tree. Like walking in front of him and putting it under the tree, and he had no clue. And the next thing you know, we're unwrapping gifts. He finds the sandwich from Santa, and then he opens it up. It was still warm. And I was like, oh, it was unbelievable. And I said, "How is the sandwich?" And he goes, "It's the best grilled cheese ever. It was the greatest one." And then a year later went by, so that's how much we got into it, because it's just fun. A year later goes by. "Noah, what do you want for Christmas this year?" "A pizza." "Oh, it's a little harder now." "Okay. What kind of pizza do you want?" "I want that bacon and ranch one they sell at Walmart." "Ooh, okay, because there's only one place you can get it." "Okay, we'll get it at Walmart." I asked Amos, "What are we going to do?" "I don't know what we're going to do. How are we going to get this in? How do you wrap this up?" And she goes, "I know. We'll put it on the pizza stone." So you have those at home, those pizza stones, and we'll put it in the fireplace and tell them it's from Santa. Okay, so we did it. Now this time, he's with Micah on the couch watching TV, oblivious to the pizza that's cooking in the oven behind him. We get it on a pizza stone. Our TV at the time was right above the fireplace. I don't know how they missed it, but I was maybe like, "Look at that." I don't know. And we got it into the fire haze, put behind the grate. "What's that smell? What's going on? They're looking for the pizza from Santa, and then they found it." And then I remember Micah going, "Oh, we've got Santa's pizza stone." And that's why he was so excited they had Santa's pizza stone. And it was that day, though, that morning, that Noah finally asked the question, how do we know? How do we know that Santa's real? Because he's seen all the Santas around. He's done the mall pictures. He's done the stuff. He's seen the movies, read the stories. How do we know? And Abraham says to him, she said, "Well, you believe in," he goes, "I have never seen him before. So how do I know?" Abraham says, "Well, you've never seen God, and you believe in him, right?" Now the pessimist in me went, "No, because now he's not going to believe in God. Are you going to question that stuff?" And then a little child will lead them. That's what the Bible says. A little child will lead them. And he just says, well, I've got a whole book about God. I've just got a few stories that don't make any sense, that aren't connected about Santa. But I've got this whole thing about God. You know, oh, forgive me, Lord, for doubting like that. Because I think sometimes we forget in the middle of the season the importance of this, and the importance of the Word made flesh, and that this is real. This is truth versus untruth, versus being false. And sometimes I feel that sometimes we take the story of Jesus' birth and it gets lost in the middle of all of our things, because it's a great story to tell to children because babies are involved, but then we have a petting zoo, we have all the shepherds, we create something that is nostalgic. It also takes on the characteristics of a fairy tale. And we forget that this was a historic event. So unto us a child that Jesus truly was, continues to be, and will come. But this is a real thing. And sometimes when we forget and it gets lost in the middle of all the other stories and all the other things that we tell during the season, your Hallmark movies that maybe you're watching right now, we've watched a few bad ones this week over the break, but it gets lost in that. And once it gets lost in there, and once it just becomes part of the family traditions and part of the stories that we tell, we forget about it when we're shopping at the store. We forget about it when we're going into debt on our credit cards. We forget about it. What does it really mean when you're dealing with family drama or the family celebrations? We forget what it really means because it gets kind of dwarfed by everything else of the season. They can get lost. Now, there are movies and TV producers that are trying to take the stories of the Bible and really do a good job of placing them in time, history, and culture. Things like The Passion of the Christ really started this off with Mel Gibson. Let's really portray it realistically. A few years later, the movie came out, The Nativity, which chronicles the Joseph and Mary and the Annunciation and all of that, all the way through his birth in real time. And even lately, if some of you are fans of it, the TV series called The Chosen, where it's just placing it in time and giving it a historical background to it. This effort to remind us that the life of Jesus is not a series of fairy tales, not a series of fables and lessons to be learned, but it's a historic event that's in our timeline, that you can point to it in the history, not just the history of the Bible, but in the history of outside sources that are outside of the Bible. Let's say that this happened and these people existed and this is true. This is a historic event that changed the course of human history. Part of that history is its link to a historic people, the Israelites. Proven, again, I said, not just in the Bible, but through archaeology and other writings and other historians. In the Old Testament of the Bible, in that place that is true, that we know has a record that was written over several hundreds, thousands of years, that there are roughly 300 prophecies told, roughly, give or take, however you want to look at it, depending on who the literary analyst is, saying how many prophecies are and what qualifies and not. There's roughly 300 prophecies about Jesus given in this time, and then the majority of them are grouped together over an 800-year period, which you say, well, it's smaller than 1,000, but 800 years is a long time. That's a long time. And most of them are grouped together in that period of time. And the prophecies are all consistent in the kinds of messages that they give through all these different prophets. As they served as God's mouthpieces to the world, showing that God is not distant, always just up there, but he's involved and sees and knows what's happening. He's involved in our world. You had the prophets who would often give words of judgment, where we get the Old Testament God of saying fire and brimstone. Then we say God's angry. What do you say? Jesus got just as ticked off in the New Testament, by the way. But this words of judgment saying, you're going the wrong way. And as a child, as a parent disciplining a child, you're going the wrong way. I'm not judging you for the sake of judgment, but we need to pull you back. We also have to have words for the wicked, because the wicked will be punished. And there are times of stories like that, prophecies of judging the wicked. We see prophecies of judgment for the people of Israel. Again, like I said, like a parent disciplining a child, because their behavior had gone so far out, away from him, and how he taught them how to be, and wanted them to be a light to the world, to be God's representatives to the world, and they were becoming just like everybody else. And how they behaved. A lot like how we at Christmas time become like everybody else. In our materialism, our worship of things, and all the stuff. How we become like everybody else. And there's consistently, and he would judge them, but intent to bring them back. He would judge the wicked people he would send nations, and this is again historical fact. You could go back and look, because he had sent nations like the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the people that would go and judge the Israelites. These all people existed, and all these things happened. And then they would take it too far. The Assyrians, the Babylonians and such would take it way too far. So God would say, you oppressed my people. You took it too far. You took it a step too much. So I'm also going to have to judge you, and I'm going to be judging the wicked. So there are prophecies against the enemies of God's people. And all these came true in our historical record. You can see it happening. And then there's also often the hope, the prophecy of hope. God telling his people, this is going to be for a period of time. But there's going to be hope for you. There's going to be a time of restoration for you. And then there's the prophecies of the Messiah. Always linked to the one who would save, would be linked to this one person who would come and be the king, the one who would be the one who would save, the one who would establish a new order of things, or at least reestablish God's order of things. Always linked to that. There would be this person, the Messiah, who would be of the throne of David. David being the high king, really like of the golden age, the one everybody looked to. Meaning not just the throne of David, like of his bloodline, but of his character as well. Like David. A descendant of, but also like in his character. There is the prophecies that we often see, two of them that are often read this time of year. One is from Isaiah chapter 7. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall name him Emmanuel. That's one. Referring to Mary and the virgin birth. Again, this wasn't a story made up by people. This was actually predicted in Isaiah chapter 7. Then also in another prophet, Micah chapter 5, it says, but you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, little town of Bethlehem, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are of old, from ancient times. Like before the existence of the world. His origins. And he will come from Bethlehem, and Bethlehem is the town of David. The descendants of David are from Bethlehem. So he's linked, he's connected in history. And then today's prophecy is one of the great prophecies of hope that was linked to this Messiah. The people were in the middle of oppression. So historically, they were in the middle of oppression by the Assyrians. It's a time of hopelessness, and they referred to it as the land. They were in the land of deep darkness. Like, think about when David wrote, the valley of the shadow of death. There is no greater hopelessness than to be surrounded by the darkness of death. There is no hope. Such was the oppression that they were living in. And in this, it foretells the ruler who will be greater than any other and will free his people from oppression. And he will rule his people, establishing righteousness and justice. And it's all going to come from his character of the king. The character. Not just the bloodline, but the character. If you read your Israelite history, recorded in the Old Testament, you know that how the king went is how the country went. How the king went is how the nation went. If it started out with words like this, and so became king, and they did the same sins and followed the wickedness of his father, it's going to go bad. But then every now and then you'd have sprinkled in the king who would follow, who did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Not everybody else, because everybody else, other kings would do what was right in their eyes, or the rights of other people. And they would pander to other people, or they would just do what they wanted, and it always went bad. This one was like, we did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and they prospered. It was really simple. But the problem is that they're also flawed, because they're still human beings. They're still flawed. And so we need someone else who is not of that ilk. Somebody else who will be born. Somebody of the line of David who will be, again, of his character, where David says, the Bible says the distinction between David and all the others was that when he was anointed, it said God was looking after a man after his own heart. Looking for a guy who was after the heart of God. Didn't have any other characteristics really about him, about his leadership capability, his diplomacy, whatever. It was just, he was a man after God's own heart. So we're looking for that, and we're going to find one, and we're going to give you one, a guy after my own heart. But he's not going to have the ultimate flaws that every other king has. He will not serve himself, but he'll serve God alone. And he'll have one heart with God. And that's Jesus. And that's Jesus. And as part of history, Jesus was then born during this time of oppression. And then as he's born during this time of oppression for the Israelites, but even in this time, and through his life, not just through his birth, but through his life, he would defeat the oppression of oppressors of all time. That's what he's going to do. In the 30-year period in which he lived, his life as recorded in the Bible, and outside of it by historians who know that Jesus existed, that Jesus rose from the dead. And they're not Christian sympathizers going back and trying to change history. They're saying something happened, this guy was dead, now he's alive. There you go. You handle it. They're like, they weren't Christians necessarily. They were just like, this happened. And it had changed the world. One of the most provable events according to historic standards. And the neat thing is, and not this neat thing, one of the beautiful things, is that his rule goes on even today. You think about the words that were written to us. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. He'll be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing it and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. That last verse right there, that last phrase, from that time on and then forever. Oftentimes we think in a future sense. There will come a day when he comes back, this will all be established. But think about that. From that time on, the moment he comes, from that time on, his rule begins. From that time on, his righteousness and justice will come, and it will last forever. And you may look to yourself and say, well, I don't really feel it. I don't see it. It's not around the world today. We're on all these competing thoughts and ideas and things. But remember, here's the proof. All of history, from the very beginning of time, was flowing down to Jesus. From the beginning of time, it was coming to Jesus. And ever since then, everything's been flowing out. That's the kind of impact that he'd had. People are still flawed. We're still flawed, so it's not going to be perfect until he comes back. But understand that he is still reigning today. And you may not even realize it. His reign. Think about this. As Nicky Gumbel, who is an author and evangelist, he wrote this. He said, the teaching of Jesus is widely acknowledged to be the greatest teaching that has ever fallen from human lips. Jesus' teaching is the foundation of our entire civilization in the West. Most of our laws were originally based on his teaching. We are making progress in virtually every field of science and technology. We travel faster and know more, and yet in the past 2,000 years, no one has improved on the moral teaching of Jesus. Bernard Ramm, an American professor of theology, said this about the teachings of Jesus. They are read more, quoted more, loved more, believed more, and translated more because they are the greatest words ever spoken. Their greatness lies in the pure, lucid spirituality in dealing clearly, definitively, and authoritatively with the greatest problems that throb in the human breast. No other man's words have the appeal of Jesus' words because no other man can answer these fundamental human questions as Jesus answered them. They are the kind of words and the kind of answers we would expect God to give. He's still in charge. And you can't really find anybody who can argue against him and how to solve a problem, deal with an issue. If you go back to the words of Jesus, even if you don't believe. There's somebody, I read through this, I can't remember his name, but it was like the president of the Atheists for Christ Society. Didn't really believe in God, but saw in the moral of teaching Jesus how much better this world would be if we just learned to live like that. And that's the truth. This is the truth. He is still reigning even today. And so often we get caught up with anxiety, we get caught up with fear, we get caught up in all the stuff. And like with anything, our world is chaotic. There's darkness in this world. The people living in darkness. But the truth is a light. And when we know that it's true, then we can start making sense of things. You know what it's like to go through your house in the dark. Even the house you know very well. You're shuffling your feet, holding onto the wall, looking for that light switch. Even in a house that you know so well and lived in for 50 years, you still need a light switch to navigate it. And Jesus, he makes sense of all these things to give us hope, to give us peace, love, and joy. And he gives us someone, a king, a Messiah, to follow. So if Christmas is a time for you that causes great anxiety, depression, or it's maybe just all about the stuff, and it's on the verge of being dark and overwhelming, chaotic, remember the truth. Remember the truth. And let this truth, the truth of God, light the way. And Jesus, he comes to us not just as a friend, not just as a baby, but as the King of the universe, who lived, not just born, but lived, died for you, forgave you, rose for you so that you could have eternal life, and that today light would come into your darkness.